Are we a full class? Obhiraj has joined, I think. তা ওরা কি করবে না? মানে ময়ূককে তো আমি জিজ্ঞেস করছি না, তাসনিম? ময়ূককে বলেছিলে তো?
আমি ময়ূরকে ফোন করছি।
না, না, ইটস ফাইন, মানে বলেছো একবার, আর দরকার নেই জোর জবরদস্তি করা। আচ্ছা, তাসনিমকে একবার বলে দেখো, তাসনিম যদি জয়েন করে ভালো, আদারওয়াইজ উই উইল বিগিন ইন 2 মিনিটস।
হ্যাঁ, হ্যাঁ। বলছি
তোমরা এই ক্লাসটা
জয়েন
কোথা থেকে
করছি।
করছো? তোমাদের ঘর থেকে?
হ্যাঁ,
নাকি আচ্ছা, না, সে যেখানেই থাকো, মানে সবাই এক জায়গায় আছে তো? Okay, now so let me begin my discussion. Um, we are going to discuss today about William Blake. But before we talk about William Blake, let me make a couple of things very clear to you. One is that William Blake should not be considered a pre-romantic poet. I think he should be considered as a pioneer, as one of the most important voices in the first generation romantic poetry. You're well aware of the two waves of romantic poetry. The first, initiated by the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and the second, um, of which Keats, Shelley, and Byron are to be seen as the most important voices. But we are primarily concerned with the first generation romantic poets, William Blake, William Wordsworth, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Today, we are going to primarily look into Blake's poetry. Now, let me begin with a telling image. It was the 21st of January, 1793. It was the 21st. I think now we have a full class. I think Tasneem and Moyuk has also joined. Uh, Thank you so much, boys, for organizing this class. It's a Sunday, and I'm really grateful to you that you have organized this class. Thank you so much. Anyway, let me begin by this telling image. It was the 21st of January, 1793. A number of people has gathered at the heart of Paris, and at the center of the scene is a machine called the guillotine. And this guillotine is sometimes looked as a metaphor of the old order. It was invented by someone called Joseph Guillotine, and it was around 10 a.m. in the morning. A number of people had gathered at the heart of Paris, and what is unfolding is the public execution of the French king Louis XVI. His head was lowered in the machine, and the executioner, Charles Henry Sanson, Sanson, lowered the blade. In the first attempt, the thick neck of the monarch was not beheaded. The monarch was not beheaded. It had just bruised his uh, the the thick muscles of his neck. It was lowered a second time, and his head, and he was decapitated, and the head was held high to a cheering group of audience. Louis XVI was beheaded. Now, this is 1793, 21st January 1793. But if we have to look into the reasons why Louis XVI and his Austrian wife Marie Antoinette was uh, was dethroned, we have to go back at least 4 decades. Europe was still in celebrating the old order, the Ashia regime, as we call it, the old order. And Paris sat at the heart of this old order. The old order celebrated authority and hierarchy. And this hierarchy, mind you, was divinely ordained, with king as the representative, as the God's representative, overseeing this hierarchy. So the ancient regime in Europe was bolstered on the twin principles of authority and a divinely ordered hierarchy, hierarchical social setup. Only the nobility and the clergy had personal liberties. All the other men only had duties. They did not enjoy any liberty. The old order was extremely inhuman, which suppressed the individual will and imagination of the people. And you can have an idea of the severity of this suppression by this data that Paris, which sat at the heart of this old order, had the largest police force in Europe. It had one police officer for every 445 citizens. Those undesirable to the state simply vanished. Thousands were imprisoned in the Bastille, which served as a prison. And they were imprisoned, they were tortured in that prison, and most importantly, they were imprisoned without trial. Now, this was the condition of Europe at large, and Paris in particular. Now, it is on this backdrop that two people would meet in Paris. It was in 1742 that Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Denis Diderot met in Paris, and they became great friends. They used to often play chess on the left bank cafes of Paris. They, both Diderot and Rousseau, were discussing radical ideas. They were extremely dissatisfied with the old order, and they felt imprisoned by this inhuman order, and they wanted this order to change. And it is in their thought that seeds of the Romantic Revolution is to be found. Denis Diderot thought, championed reason and rationality. He celebrated pragmatism, and he believed that the future of the human society would be built on reason. To quote Diderot, he famously said, "Man is born to think." So he was clearly celebrating rational principles and pragmatism. On the other hand, Rousseau championed feeling over thought. He said to feel is to exist. For him, emotions were a very important category that could liberate man from this imprisonment. So, although Rousseau and Diderot were championing different ways of ushering in liberty, although they were espousing almost contradictory principles, Diderot championed reason and pragmatism. On the other hand, Rousseau championed feeling and emotions. But it is abundantly clear that both of them were extremely dissatisfied with the old order, and they wanted this regime to change. So they were both preaching freedom and liberty for the individual. They were preaching freedom and liberty for the individual. Diderot through the championing of reason and pragmatism, Rousseau through the championing of thought and emotion. But we have to keep this in mind that these radical ideas were not well received by the old regime. On 24th July 1949, Diderot was arrested by the Parisian police. He was arrested for writing a book. Diderot wrote a book.
Sir,
Yes?
so you told 1949.
1749, I'm sorry, 1749.
Okay, sir.
Obviously, we're talking about the 18th century. So it's 1749. Diderot was arrested on 24th July 1749 at 7:30 in the morning. The Parisian police arrested Diderot for writing a book called the Encyclopedia. It was an enormous book. It had over 70,000 articles and 3,000 diagrams. It was a compilation of all useful knowledge dedicated to the ideas of progress and of science. Diderot was actually trying to build a map of human understanding. Then you may ask me, sir, why was he arrested? Why was the book considered an act of treason, an act against the state, against the very principles on which the idea of the old order was predicated? You see, the Diderot described the book as a manifesto of pure reason. And since the book was predicated on the ideas of rationality and pragmatism, the book did not have a place for God. Although the book had 70,000 articles and over 3,000 diagrams, the book did not have an entry on God. Now, this was considered to be an act of high treason, because the entire old order was predicated upon the principle of authority and hierarchy, which was divinely ordained. And here is a book which claims to be a map of human understanding, had the audacity of not including an entry on God. Diderot was immediately arrested and put behind bars, obviously without any trial. In the book, Diderot made it abundantly clear that civilization has usurped the place of God, that civilization is predicated on scientific progress and reason. And it is through the powers of science and classification that we can understand all human phenomena and civilizational phenomena. Therefore, there was no need for God because science is an adequate tool to unfurl the mysteries of nature. And it is only through science and reason that we can unfurl the mysteries of nature. And such a civilization which is based on scientific progress and reason does not have a place for God. This certainly challenged all the principles of the divinely ordained Ashia regime. The state was enraged, the encyclopedia was banned, and Diderot was put behind bars. Rousseau, like Diderot, espoused radical ideas. He too preached the freedom and the liberty of the individual, but he believed that it was it was feeling and emotion, it was imagination that could lead men to freedom and liberty. In October 1749, while Rousseau was going to meet his dear friend Diderot in his cell, Rousseau had a revelation. Because Rousseau championed feeling, imagination, and intuition, on his way to the jail where Diderot was imprisoned, Rousseau suddenly had this revelation that man was born free, but everywhere he is in chains. That man was born free, and everywhere he is in chains. That man is actually imprisoned by institutions. And he argued that the key to human freedom lies in individual will and feeling. I had pointed out at the beginning of the class that in the European Ashia regime, only the clergy and the aristocracy had liberties. All other men only had duties. There was no room for individual freedom. They only had to carry out the diktats of the institution. But Rousseau here was championing just the contrary. He was repeatedly pointing out that the key to human freedom lay in individual will, feeling, imagination, and intuition. Now, Rousseau, like Diderot, was celebrating radical ideas. Although Rousseau took a very different stance from Diderot, yet the ideas that he was espousing were radical, were looked down upon with suspicion. Rousseau, in his famous book Emily, celebrated man in his natural state, man who is untouched by civilization. And he argued that in his natural state, man is essentially good. For Rousseau, civilization is corrupt. What corrupts man is the advent of civilization. Civilization is harmful. Culture, all cultures are corrupt and artificial. And science is wicked. Now, please keep in mind, Rousseau and Diderot were great friends. But for Diderot, the key to human civilization was predicated on the practice of reason and pragmatism. Diderot celebrated civilization. Diderot celebrated science and its developments. Whereas Rousseau was skeptical about the values of civilization. For Rousseau, science, culture, and civilization were artificial categories. They corrupted men. They forced men out of their natural state in which they were essentially good. It is only with the advent of civilization, culture, and science that corruption begins in man. So Rousseau was actually calling for an end of civilization itself. Rousseau wanted men to go back to their natural state, to go back to their pre-civilizational selves. Obviously, these were considered radical ideas. These were labeled as libel, as acts against the state, and Rousseau was forced out of France. So both Diderot and Rousseau, great friends, they were trying to espouse radical ideas which would celebrate the will and the liberty of the individual over the diktats of an inhuman and autocratic old regime. And obviously, both of them found no place in France. Now, France was not ready to practice these radical ideas that were espoused by Rousseau and Diderot. However, these ideas were put to practice in the new land called America, which in itself was an experiment in living. Religious radicals and political refugees had arrived in America in order to create a community of their own. They were dissatisfied with Europe, with the European old regime. And they wanted to build a community based on the principle of self-governance and liberty. A community that would celebrate the freedom of the individual. I'm pretty sure SR1 must have talked about Thomas Paine. Yes. He must have talked about his famous pamphlet, Common Sense. He must have talked about rights of man. please Google or have an idea about common sense. I will talk about it at some length. Now, Thomas Paine arrived in America after facing a series of misfortunes in Europe. He had faced bankruptcy in Europe. His first wife had died, and a heartbroken Thomas Paine, a dissatisfied Thomas Paine, left Europe and arrived in America on 30th November 1774, 2 years before the American Declaration of Independence. I'm pretty sure you're aware that America declared its independence in 1776, 4th of July, 1776. It was Thomas Paine who actually put into practice the radical ideas espoused by Diderot and Rousseau. In America, Paine started to work as a journalist, and he wrote scathing articles attacking the imposition of heavy taxes on Americans by the English Empire. I'm pretty sure you're aware that America was actually an English colony and one of the earliest English colonies to declare its independence. He wrote a radical pamphlet, Thomas Paine wrote a radical pamphlet called Common Sense, where he attacked the idea of monarchy and praised the notion of a civil society based on the idea of individual freedom and liberty. He was extremely critical of the idea of monarchy. I hope you realize how Rousseau and Diderot's ideas are now being practiced and espoused in the new land, in the newfound land, America. This radical pamphlet, Common Sense, would fire the American Declaration of Independence. Paine would famously write in the Common Sense, trying to define the kind of community that they are trying to build in America by stating, and I quote, "In America, the law is the king." And then it was these radical ideas that fueled the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. The ideas of having a nation without a king, without aristocracy, without a national church, based squarely upon equal rights of every individual to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were ideas that were directly drawn from Thomas Paine's radical pamphlet, Common Sense. And from our discussion, it is abundantly clear that Thomas Paine was influenced by the radical ideas of Diderot and Rousseau. So you see how Diderot and Rousseau, when they were espousing the radical ideas in 1740s in France, way ahead of their times, reappears in America. Those ideas reappeared in a metamorphosed form in America through Thomas Paine in the 1770s, fueling the American Revolution. An attempt to build a human community predicated on the notion of equal rights of individuals to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A nation without a king without an aristocracy and without a national church. The American Revolution of 1776 was a clarion call for a revolution in Europe. The news of American Revolution spread like wildfire. It was a radical experiment. And this idea of having a nation without a king, without an aristocracy, without an established church, celebrating individual will and liberty, fired the imagination of the young radicals in Britain. And this notion of individual liberty and freedom from the old regime that America had already achieved through the American Declaration of Independence began to undermine the respect for the king and the existing political order. It is in this context of a widespread skepticism fueled by the notions of liberty and individual freedom that the American Declaration of Independence had already achieved, that we must locate the poems of William Blake. That radical ideas were gaining momentum in Europe, particularly in Britain and France. That the respect for the authority of the king and the old regime was waning fast. It is in this environment that we must situate William Blake and his poetry. Right? Am I making sense? Boys?
Yes, sir.
Arju and others? Arunno?
Yes, sir.
Moyu?
Yes, sir.
Argho?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir. Yes, sir.
Nayan?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Obhiraj. Okay. Now this is very important. You must properly grasp this circle because it all began in France with Rousseau and Diderot. Did not find fruition in France because they were way ahead of their times. These radical ideas traveled through Thomas Paine in America, achieved great success, then traveled back to Europe and fueled the radicals of Europe. Fueled the imagination of the radicals of Europe. 1776. মাথায় রেখো। Blake, in his poem America, celebrates the American Revolution and sees the experiment in America as a great prophecy for a future world, that would celebrate individual freedom and liberty. He writes in America, and I'm quoting, "The King of England, looking westwards, trembles at the vision. Let the slave grinding in the mill run out into the fields. Let him look up into the heavens and laugh in the bright air, for empire is no more." Blake too is calling for a radical freedom. This is a clarion call for revolution and the liberty of the individual. and he declares the death of the empire. So look at how Blake receives the American Revolution with outstretched arms, celebrating its immense possibilities. In 1779, a 21-year-old William Blake was apprenticed to Sir Joshua Reynolds, who was one of the most celebrated artists, English artists of the time, of the 18th century. Sir Reynolds was rich. He was widely respected. He was an eminent voice in British painting. For him, art was based upon the classical principles of order, unity, harmony, and rationality. Order, unity, harmony, and rationality. He championed reason. And he believed that artworks can be produced by studying nature. He was a practitioner of the realist school of painting. You know, in your classroom, there are paintings by Sir Joshua Reynolds. If you look at, I think it remember 33 or 34, I'm not sure, but there are paintings by Sir Joshua Reynolds that has been, encased and hung on the walls. Please have a look at them. Blake, who was apprenticed to Joshua Reynolds, however, felt the contrary. He thought imagination is the force that fuels great art. He did not believe in the faculties of order, unity, harmony, and above all, rationality. He rebelled against his teacher. And in 1780, he was apprenticed, please keep in mind, in 1779. Within 1 year, he rebelled against his teacher and painted something called Albion Rose. Now, just give me a moment. Let me show you Albion Rose. Look at the painting. Just give me a moment. এই আমি এটা বড় করে দেখাতে পাচ্ছি না কেন বলতো?
স্যার শেয়ার স্ক্রিন করুন তাহলে।
না না, মানে ছবিটা বড় হচ্ছে না আমার, এটাই হলো প্রবলেম। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হয়েছে, জাস্ট এ মিনিট। শেয়ার স্ক্রিন করবো না রে, এইটা না?
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
হলো?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, হয়েছে হয়েছে।
এটা কি হচ্ছে?
অ্যাকসেপ্ট করুন স্যার।
অ্যাকসেপ্ট তো করছি কিন্তু কিছু তো হচ্ছে না রে বাবু।
স্যার রিফ্রেশ করে অ্যাকসেপ্ট করুন তাহলে।
হ্যাঁ
ধুর বাবা। অ্যালবিয়ন রোজ, দাঁড়াও, আমি কি করব তোমাকে? অ্যাডমিট, হ্যাঁ করেছি। Now look at the painting that Arju is sharing. Albion Rose. It is a painting of a young man with outstretched arms, a gesture of liberation. And look at this man, he is in his natural state. He is untouched by the sensation of shame. Just like Adam and Eve in their prelapsarian stage, they did not have a sensation of shame. They did not have this feeling of shame. They only had a feeling of shame after they ate the apple, but not prior to that. They are in their divine nudity, therefore in their natural state. Prelapsarian. Look at his outstretched arms as if it is a symbol of liberty, of freedom, of emancipation. Look at the energy, the exaltation in his eyes and face. And there are critics who have pointed out that this is actually a self-portrait. Blake is imagining himself as a man who has subverted the institutions, who have achieved emancipation and freedom from the old regime. Thank you, Arjun. এটাকে আর শেয়ার করতে হবে না। Now, Blake lived in Poland Street near Soho, which is a suburb in London, with his wife Catherine and his younger brother Robert. And he faced immense financial struggle. It was he who painted, etched, and published his own poems and his illustrations. He had very few readers, but he would continue to do this work. In 1809, he wrote an article called Notes on the Writings of Sir Joshua Reynolds, 1809. Notes on the Writings of Sir Joshua Reynolds, in order to underline how his school of thought differed from Reynolds' understanding of painting predicated on order, unity, harmony, and rationality. And I'm quoting, this is Blake on his teacher, Joshua Reynolds. This man, meaning Reynolds, Joshua Reynolds, was hired to depress art. I say art or genius are not teachable or acquirable, but are born with us. Reynolds says the contrary. Reynolds says that if you follow the classical principles of order, unity, harmony, and rationality, you will be able to produce art. Reynolds believes in a recipe of art. I do not subscribe to those principles. Such artists as Reynolds are at all times hired by the Satans for the depression of art, to destroy art. So while Reynolds believes that following certain classical principles of unity, harmony, rationality, you can produce great art, Blake, on the other hand, champions imagination, individual freedom, free will. And for him, imagination, feeling, they hold the key to art. Now, Blake, like Thomas Paine, was trying to conceive of a social order that would celebrate liberty of the individual, that would undermine the old order of Europe, that would celebrate the freedom of man and undermine the hierarchies of the old order. And it is through Blake, through minds like Blake, that these revolutionary ideas slowly spread through the radicals in Europe. And Soho Square, which is a suburb near London, became a hotbed for the radicals. It was considered to be a shadow area, the dark underbelly of London, where radicals could freely publish anti-monarchist propaganda. One such French radical who sought refuge in the Soho Square was Jacques-Pierre Brisson, Brissot, Jacques, Jacques, Pierre, Pierre, Brisson, Brissot. He published a periodical called Universal Correspondence. And in that paper, he continued to publish anti-monarchy propaganda. He called for bloodshed and revolution. And he criticized the decadent principles of the old regime in Paris. Because, you see, Soho Square gave you that liberty in London. In 1784, he returned to Paris. Brisson returned to Paris in order to gather funds for his journalistic ventures in London. However, the moment he landed in Paris on 19th May 1784, he was arrested, put behind bars in Bastille, in the Bastille prison, and he was charged with for publishing seditious journalistic materials against the old regime in France. He stayed behind bars for 2 months. He was arrested on 19th May 1784. And the radical press in France was also gaining immense momentum and popularity. They were also in publishing anti-monarchist propaganda. They were criticizing the old order, and they, like Brisson, was calling for bloodshed and revolution. On 14 July 1789, Louis XVI imposed martial law in Paris. Thousands gathered Thousands of Parisians gathered on the streets and stormed Bastille. Now, Bastille was this 14th century fortress which served as a prison. To the Parisians, it was the metaphor of the old regime, where anyone who questioned the state would be put behind bars without trial, would be persecuted without trial, would be tortured to death in the Bastille. Bastille was stormed. And the governor of Bastille was killed. He was beheaded and his head was displayed on a pike. We have the French Revolution. That would culminate in the beheading of the French queen, of the French king, on 21st January 1793. Louis XVI would be guillotined. And it was this revolutionary fervor that would give birth to the poetry of William Wordsworth. You know, we would refer to his book 6 of the Preludes, where he talks about the enthusiasm surrounding the French Revolution, how the French Revolution was ushering in the new radical order, how it was an experiment in proto-democracy, how it was celebrating liberty, equality, and freedom. But then there would be the subsequent disillusionment. And Wordsworth would talk about it in his Preludes. So if the American Revolution was the greatest intellectual star for Blake, it was the French Revolution that served as the greatest intellectual impetus for Wordsworth and Coleridge. We will talk about it. Now let us talk about Blake's Songs of Innocence. I'm pretty sure that you are aware that we will be talking about the lamb and the tiger. And I am also sure that you are aware that they are to be read as co-texts, as companion texts. Blake wrote the Songs of Innocence. It is a book of poems which has 23 poems, and it was published in 1789. The year of the French Revolution. The Songs of Experience was written 5 years later in 1794. And Songs of Experience had 26 poems. Now, please keep in mind, Songs of Innocence was written at a time when the revolutionary fervor was at its highest. And the Songs of Experience was written at a time when the disillusionment of the French Revolution was slowly setting in. Although the French Revolution promised to establish a human community based on the principles of liberty, equality, and freedom, where all individuals would be allowed to have equal rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it quickly degenerated into the reign of terror. And then, with the ascension of Napoleon to power, Jane Austen is in your syllabus, and I'm pretty sure you are aware of the Napoleonic wars that ravaged Europe, the continental blockade, and the other political changes that were ushered in by Napoleon in the first 2 decades of the 19th century. So the disillusionment concerning French Revolution had started to crystallize, had started to precipitate by the 1790s. And the Songs of Experience is a product of that time. Now, let me quickly ask you, is this background clear? Is this background to romantic poetry clear? Before we start talking about the text, is this clear? This would serve as
Yes.
a dual lecture for both Wordsworth and Coleridge, and for Blake. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I hope it's fine if I continue the class till 2. Is this okay with all of you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, may I ask Arjo to kindly display Songs of Innocence, I mean the lamb for me, the lamb, with the plate. Yes, please, please, go ahead. I want the plate. I also want the etching. What's it? Now, please keep in mind that the poems are to be read in relation to the etching. Now, what do you see in the etching? কি দেখতে পাচ্ছ?
I mean, a small child uh, with some sheeps.
Sheep, sorry, sheep,
A
sheep.
kind of, yes, a kind of village setting or rustic setting in the background.
It is a rustic setting, true. There is a naked child full of innocence. A naked child, perhaps as a symbol of prelapsarian purity and innocence of man, tending, is certainly not aware of his, no child is aware of his nudity. So it's certainly a marker of prelapsarian innocence. There's a flock of sheep. There is a barn at the backdrop, and the door to that small cottage is open, not closed. Look at the trees that form a leafy canopy over these figures. Arju, can you please bring the slide down so that I can see the leaf? Take it upwards so that I can see the yes. Look at the leafy canopy. There are leaves. See, and it forms a canopy, a shade, a sense of shelter. The skies are blue. There is nothing sinister in the etching. Now, Arjo, can you go to the tiger, the etching of the tiger? Certainly. Now look at the tiger. Thank you, Arjun. And what do you make out of its setting? There is no canopy. There is a leafless trunk. So there is no sense of canopy and shelter. Please note this. No sense of canopy and shelter. There is also a preponderance of dark colors. The etching of the lamb is more colorful and brighter than the etching of the tiger. The tiger, however, does not appear as ferocious as the poem promises it to be. The tiger, however, appears to be almost to be a domesticated cat. The ferocity, so there is an incongruity between the ferocity that the text suggests and the image of the tiger. The image of the tiger is not as ferocious as the text promises it to be. So there is certainly an incongruity between the ferocity, the ferociousness, the power, the strength, the energy that is being suggested by the text and the tiger that is conceived by William Blake. It appears to be timid. It appears to be almost like a domesticated pet rather than a wild, ferocious animal, full of energy and strength. Isn't that so? What is your take? এই বাক্যটা থেকে ভয় পাবে রাজশ্রী? বলো আর্য। How do he? So because there is no sense of canopy, the tree is not sheltering you. There are no twigs. There is only, a sense of barrenness. You are out in the sun. You are there to face the weather. There is no shade, no reassuring sense of shelter.
So if you come to the tiger, then the tiger's body is not also like that. It's not a healthy tiger, I would say. Like it is
No, it's
suffering
not a
from
very
some kind
powerful
of
tiger.
disease. Yes.
It's not a tiger that would immediately incite in you a sense of doom.
Yes, sir.
It's frail, it's domesticated, it's almost timid. Blake was a great artist. Why would he indulge in such an incongruity? That's a question that we have to try and answer. That there is an incongruity is beyond question. The text promises us a wild, ferocious, powerful beast. And what we see in the etching is a timid, frail, almost domesticated feline. Why is there this incongruity? Do we all agree that there is an incongruity? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes,
All
sir.
of you, right?
Yes, sir.
Moyuk and others, আমাদের রাজর্ষি,
Yes,
Moyuk, do
yes.
you think there is an incongruity?
Yes.
Yes, there is an incongruity. But why would now the question therefore is this a deliberate incongruity that Blake is creating between the text and the image? And why is he doing so? We will come to this. Now let us go back
আচ্ছা
to the
টাইগারের
first poem.
স্পেলিংটা ওরকম কেন?
We'll come to it. Let us go to the first poem first. Let us go to the lamb. Rajesh, yes. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and over the mead? Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly and bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? The first stanza of the poem is full of childlike questions. The little lamb is repeatedly asked, who is his creator? And then the attributes of the little lamb are underlined. It has a clothing, but the clothing is of delight. Now, it has a tender voice, but whenever it cries, the entire valley rejoices. So it is made abundantly clear that this lamb is no general animal. It has been, the questions, therefore, now assume a rhetorical value. They become rhetorical questions. The questions, therefore, are answering themselves. The lamb, therefore, is the creation of Almighty. Is protected by the Almighty because it has a clothing of delight. Little lamb, I will tell thee, little lamb, I will tell thee, he is called by thy name. The God is often referred to as the lamb, as the sacrificial animal. I hope you know that Jesus was called the lamb, the sacrificial animal who sacrificed his life for the salvation of mankind. For he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. Now, when Jesus was crucified, he was still not considered to be a Godhead. He proved his divine attribute in resurrection. When he resurrected himself after his death as a little child, he proved that he could conquer death, and therefore he was beyond mortal confines. He had metaphysical attribute. He became a little child, I a child and thou a lamb, we are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. So the child and the lamb are the dual attributes of God. God became the sacrificial animal, and his metaphysical prowess was only proved in resurrection, when he was resurrected as a child. It is in resurrection, it is in embracing this new life after conquering death, that his metaphysical prowess, his godlike attributes were beyond question. So both the child and the lamb, they are meek, they are gentle, they are innocent, they are simple. And they are both the attributes of God. Now, please keep in mind that both the lamb and the child are innocent. But their innocence is dangerously tied to ignorance. They are innocent not because they have conquered the tiger-like forces of experience. They are innocent because they are still uninitiated in the ways of the world. The harrowing experience of the world of experience has not yet touched them, and therefore they are fragile. Am I making sense?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Now let us go to the tiger. Arjo? Yes. Huh. Blake writes in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell It is a very important text where Blake explores the necessity of opposing forces. And Blake writes in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he celebrates the opposing forces. He writes, without contraries is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence. Anyone who tries to reconcile them tries to destroy existence. Lamb and tiger are apparently contradictory forces. The existence of tiger like forces jeopardizes the existence of lamb like creatures. Then why did God make the tiger like forces? God Himself is known by the title of the lamb and the child. God Himself represents these innocent, fragile forces. Then why did He create a ferocious animal like the tiger, a ferocious attribute like the tiger like force? Why did He create so? Because Blake believes that they are complementary forces. That if innocence has to attain a degree of permanence, it must experience the harrowing forces like the tiger. It must go through the tiger like forces of experience in order to achieve a degree of permanence. Otherwise, this innocence of the child and the lamb is ephemeral, is prone to decay because they are dangerously allied to ignorance. They will only attain a degree of permanence when they have experienced the tiger like forces of the world. Then Blake would say they would achieve the state of Beulah, 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 which is the state of higher innocence. Beulah, Beulah, which is the state of higher innocence. Now let us come to this poem, The Tyger. Now please look at the spelling of the tiger. It's not Tiger, but Tyger, because Blake is not referring to a particular tiger. He is rather referring to a tiger-like ferocious energy. He is rather referring to the harrowing experiences of the world. He is rather referring to the attribute rather than to the animal. Am I making sense, Rajarshi?
Yes, sir.
So he is not interested in the animal per se. He is rather interested in the archetypal energy, in the archetypal ferocity, in the tiger-like forces of the world of experience. These forces, Blake would argue, jeopardizes the existence of the lamb and the child. But these forces are essential, are an essential part of existence. Innocence and experience cannot be reconciled. If you try to reconcile these contradictory forces, you will destroy existence. Existence thrives only in contradiction. They therefore must be taken as complementary pairs, as pairs that are apparently contradictory, but pairs that supplement and complement each other, pairs without which existence itself would cease to exist. Tiger, tiger burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could fear thy fearful symmetry? Could. And go to the last stanza. It's almost an identical stanza, but the word could is replaced by dare. So the poet persona as he begins the poem, is in disbelief whether there is any force. এই গেম আনমিউট করো, কার মিউট করা নেই, এই প্লিজ মিউট করো, আনমিউট হয়ে গেছে কেউ একটা মিউট, হ্যাঁ, অলরাইট. Now you see, look at the first stanza and the last stanza. They are almost identical except one word. The word could is replaced by dare. The last stanza, in the last stanza there is dare. Dare frame thy fearful symmetry. So from could to dare. The poet persona, as he begins the poem, is uncertain whether there is any force in this universe which has the power to create something as ferocious as the tiger. So he begins as a skeptic. When the poem ends, he is no longer a skeptic. He knows that there is a power so immense in its possibility that it has the prowess to create something as ferocious, as fearful, as fierce as the tiger. So from skepticism, the poet persona moves towards a sense of fascinated wonder. He is awed by the fact that the Almighty is so powerful that it can give birth to creatures the journey of the poem. The forests of the night. And the first stanza asks that what is this immortal hand or eye? What is this immortal being? Is there at all any immortal being who can create such a ferocious animal like the tiger? In what distant deeps or skies burn the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? The tiger is so ferocious. The tiger is so powerful. How can a being, how is a being capable of forging an animal like the tiger? From where did he draw this fire? From where did he? What is the source of this ferocious beast? What shoulder and what art? What twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand, what dead feet? And when, as this supreme being was creating the tiger, what did he do when he finally breathed life into this beast? Wasn't he afraid that the beast would pounce upon him and tear him into pieces? What is this immortal being that is capable of controlling this enormous energy, this ferocious, untamable wildness? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what the grasp? Dare its deadly terror claps. Now, what are the instruments that he used in order to create this beast? Where did he get the anvil? Where did he get the hammer? Now, this is a reference to the Greek god Hephaestus, who works as a blacksmith. The reference, or rather to a divine blacksmith, because the tiger is so strong, he must be made of materials as strong as the iron. He must be welded in iron-like materials. Where did the creator find the hammer, the anvil, in order to forge such a ferocious beast? So the poet persona is still in disbelief that who could, how could he do it, and with what tools did he do it. Now comes the most important stanza. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears is a direct reference to the fall of Lucifer. Who was Lucifer? Lucifer was an archangel. Lucifer was the most beloved of God. And why did he fall? Because he challenged God's authority. So he was thrown out of heaven. Lucifer was a creation that lived a life of its own, that tried to subvert the authority of the Creator. Don't you think the tiger has the same propensities? Don't you think the tiger is a monstrous beast capable of undermining the control capacity, the prowess of his creator? Don't you think it will assume a life of its own, jeopardize all other forces, kill, maim, rupture the innocent, the young, the lamb-like and the childlike forces of the world? Then comes the very important question: did he smile his work to see? Now, when the tiger was made full of ferocity, power, energy, did the supreme being who created such a ferocious beast, did he smile to, was he happy with the end product? Did he who made the lamb make thee? This is the connection. And that is why the lamb and the tiger are treated as companion pieces. Is the God who is as meek and gentle, as innocent and fragile as the lamb and the tiger. Is the God who represents the lamb-like and the tiger-like, the lamb-like forces of the world of innocence. Why did he give birth? Is he the same creator who created the ferocious, wild beast called the tiger, jeopardizing the existence of the innocent and the fragile? Then comes the famous stanza, tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Then why did he dare to do so? Now that it is established that the creator has the power of creating such a beast, such a ferocious beast, then the question, then the poet persona is amazed. Why did he dare to do such a thing? That he is capable of doing it is now beyond doubt, because the tiger-like forces of the world exist. But why did he do so? Why did he dare to unleash such a destructive force? The answer is, it is essential for innocence to gain a degree of permanence. Now, please note, in the poem, there are multiple references to fire. When we are referring to the divine blacksmith, we were basically referring to fire, because it is with the help of fire that he molds and melds. Now, fire consumes everything. Fire burns and destroys, but fire also purifies. So the tiger is to be seen as fire, as something that consumes but purifies. Something that purges you of all dispensable attributes. Something that purifies, that preserves the neat, the purest, the cleanest, therefore indispensable to existence. Now, the multiple references to fire can also be read with reference to Prometheus. I'm pretty sure you are aware of the myth of Prometheus. Prometheus stole fire
Yes, sir.
from the god and gave it to the humans. For it, he was tied to the Caucasus. For this rebellion against God, he was tied to the Caucasus, and every day an eagle would come and peck at his liver. He would be tortured till the end of time because he rebelled against the God and gave human beings fire. Gave them a way out of their forests of the night. Gave them illumination, knowledge, episteme. So, Tyger, although destructive, although an unbridled, ferocious energy, is an indispensable part of existence. It consumes the lamb-like forces, but only to give it a greater life, a purer life, a life that is immune to the ravages of time, a life that is pure, a life that ushers them into the realm of the state of higher innocence. And there, the lamb and the tiger sit together because they are no longer to be seen in the state of higher innocence as contradictory forces jeopardizing each other's existence. They are then to be seen as complementary pairs making existence possible. Right? This is all that I had to say. Now comes the most important bit. Why is there a discrepancy between the ferocious beast as promised by the text and the image that is etched? Now, there are critics who have pointed out that both the lamb-like and tiger-like forces are present within a human being. As the poem progresses, there is a radical identification of human being with the tiger-like forces. Man was made in God's image. He lived in perfect communion with God in the Garden of Eden till he committed a sin. So human beings failed to hold on to their state of innocence and purity. So the tiger-like propensities are to be found within a man. It is this increasing identification with the human tiger, the human agency which is eager to kill its lamb-like propensities with his tiger-like forces. That, some critics suggest, may have hindered Blake to create a much more ferocious tiger. Because had the tiger been conceived, painted as much more ferocious, the idea would be tilted towards the destructive and ever-consuming potential of the tiger rather than to its regenerative potential. Because the tiger not only kills, it also brings you to the threshold of a new, greater, heightened life, which is symbolized by the fire imagery. Fire kills, but it also purifies. Trial by fire is a harrowing experience, but if you survive the trial, you stand at the brink of a heightened life, where fire only gives you illumination. It doesn't burn you any longer. When you read book 1, Paradise Lost, you will see in hell, there is an eternal fire raging. The fire only burns you, but refuses to give you any illumination. But the tiger is a combination of both. It will burn you, but there is also a sense of regeneration implicit in the tiger, like the fire. Now, when you have survived the trial by fire, you would stand at the brink of a heightened life where tiger-like forces would only give you illumination. They will no longer burn you. So perhaps in order to underline this dual potential of the tiger has been depicted as meek and not as ferocious, right? Now, this is my take on the two poems. This is how I read the two poems. I request all of you to go through the poems, to go through the ideas that I have discussed, and let me know. Right? Is this more or less clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And
Yes, sir.
please keep in mind that these two poems are co-texts. These two poems are complementary pairs. These two poems, innocence and experience, are not to be seen as contradictory ideas. They are to be seen as complementing each other, as supplementing each other, right? So that existence can be conceived. I hope this is somewhat clear. Go through the poems, and all right. Can we arrange another class for Kubla Khan first, and then we will talk about. Okay, so when can we meet? Yes, please. পেপার 2 তে কি বলেছি আমি? না, গ্লোরিয়াস রেভলিউশন, গ্লোরিয়াস রেভলিউশন। হ্যাঁ, এগুলোই মূল আইডিয়া। এগুলো করলেই হবে। ঠিক আছে? তোমাদের আর কিছু জিজ্ঞেস করার আছে? আর তাহলে আমরা কালকে কি একবার মিট করতে পারি?
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
কালকে কখন মিট করা যায় বলো তো? কলেজ আওয়ারে করলে খুব ভালো হয়।
স্যার কালকে 11টা থেকে 12টা ফাঁকা আছে স্যার। স্যার 12টা থেকে ক্লাস নেবে।
11টা থেকে 12টা বলছো?
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
ঠিক আছে, কালকে আমরা 11টা থেকে 12টা আমরা একটুখানি we will have a look at first Coleridge and then we will talk about Wordsworth. ঠিক আছে? কালকে তাহলে 11টা থেকে 12টা তোমরা তাহলে ক্লাসেই থেকো, ক্লাসে আমরা অনলাইন মিট করে নেব। ওকে স্যার। থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ।
Thank you, sir.
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।